Ever since I was a small boy, I would often go hunting with my father outside of New Orleans in the swamps. One night, we were looking for game when my father found an alligator that began to appear. I couldn't tell you if alligator hunting was in any way illegal, but my dad took a shot at it, killing it right there in the spot, shooting it right between the eyes. We went over to see if we could get some meat off of it, when suddenly, from the bushes, this man-sized lizard appeared. Dark in color, having big orange eyes reminiscent to that of a cat, and reeking of decaying meat. My father instantly started shaking as he slowly placed down his shotgun. This pterodactyl-looking thing hissed at us and began to move quickly towards us. That's when we realized it was actually moving towards the dead alligator my father had just shot. My father picked up his shotgun, aimed at it, pulling the trigger, but the shotgun jammed. All of a sudden, we heard something behind us, realizing there was more of these things walking the distance towards us. The one in front had now picked up this dead alligator, began to tear its skull open, and eating the meat, like brain matter and such, in front of us. We stood there in shock. It kind of reminded me of something that had torn a turtle open, eating the fresh meat. The one behind us gained distance quickly, leaping, knocking my father over. I ran as fast as I could, hoping it wouldn't give chase to me and leave my parents alone. There was blood all over from where this thing had scratched me while leaping over. These things let my father go. I think they were so preoccupied with the dead alligator. My dad came running up behind me while these things stole his kill, disappearing off into the swamp. I don't know what they were, but I sure hope that nobody has to ever experience such a thing again. The weird thing is, this happened in the 1980s, right around the same time that boy from Skateboard Swamp saw that strange reptilian being running after him. I have no idea if they're the same thing or not. During my junior year of high school in Denver, Colorado, I had an encounter with a reptilian being. It was October 12th, 2003. While going to catch the bus for school, something odd happened that would forever change my life. While walking to the bus stop, it was around 7 a.m., when suddenly, this very tall being appears out of the woodline. Quick note, the thick brush in which this figure appeared from has kind of marshes beyond it. So, I see this figure, and I can't quite make out what it is at first, but I realize whatever this figure is has scales, visible scales, and it's walking upright, just like a man would. Curious, but also very creeped out. I ignore it for a moment, try to pull out my phone, which at the time was a Nokia brick phone, only to discover the battery is dead. Upon putting my phone back in my pocket, I decide to see that I'm going to see who this is, assuming it was a person who was thinking they were clever, walking around in some sort of Halloween costume. I figured it was a little early for Halloween, but you never know. Sometimes you get those weirdos walking around. As I get closer, this thing looks like someone's nightmare. Its skin was scalier than I had first thought, and it had these little horns on top of its head and back. Not like probably what you're imagining. Not like ram horns or anything, but these little spikes, I guess if that's how I can describe them. But most impressively were the whites of its eyes. They were like slit pupils. Now, I have never been afraid of anything before, but something told me in my gut I needed to run, and now. I started running through the lot behind me, trying to get away from whatever this thing was, when suddenly a car passes by slowly. This thing didn't even seem to notice me, but turned to get a better look at the passing car. When it did, I noticed that its face was more human than I thought. When I saw its face and got to look more intently, I felt weird, beginning running faster to my house. Now, I'm not sure if this being is still there or not. It's been almost 20 years, but by the time I reached my front door, I don't think it was following me anymore. Now, I had heard of weird stuff happening in my neighborhood. Other kids whom I went to school with would always joke about what they would call as the Green Man, supposedly a tall green lizard man who stalked the marshes and woods. I always thought it was ridiculous, and I'm not saying that's what I saw, but I'm going to tell you what happened next. So I started to tell my best friends about what I had saw. Some of them believed me, some of them did not. But I think they could see how much it affected me. I mean, hell, I missed that whole day of school, and I wasn't going to dare tell my parents about what I witnessed. They would never believe me. In fact, they probably would have assumed I was on drugs or dropping LSD. The only choice I really had at the time was to share it with a few of my close friends, and primarily keeping it to myself, until all these years later, when I developed an interest in cryptozoology and the paranormal, thanks to sources like YouTube, which allow everybody and anybody to share their personal encounter stories and experiences. This is when I learned recently that I am not alone at all. In fact, I'm not crazy, because I battled with that for years, convincing myself that it was just a strong hallucination, or a bad nightmare, or a very vivid nightmare, I should say. Anyway, after hearing and learning everything that I have, and spending copious amount of hours researching and diving deep into my past, I believe that reptilians are real. Maybe not in the traditional sense, where it's humans transforming into reptile creatures, but maybe reptilian cryptids are an actual thing. I stand firm on my stance, primarily because I've seen one with my own eyes. I'm a hobbyist and a paranormal investigator. I wanted to take some time and share with you an encounter story that I've recently come to know from a man in the state of Alabama. This man had an encounter near his home with what he claims was a reptilian that he said was about 10 feet tall. And it had left 3 claw marks on the hood of his truck in a fierce showdown. It apparently tried to kill the man, but was unsuccessful. He, however, was successful in getting away. What made this the scariest of all is that there were other witnesses to this strange event. The description given by those who saw the same thing as the man were the same. The witnesses were his wife and older son. The man was terrified of what he saw that afternoon. He claimed that this thing climbed right out of the swamps, went right for him. They kind of had a brawl, where he shot at this thing multiple times, trying to get it to go away. The man deeply admitted to being terrified of what he saw, and if this thing wanted to kill him, it could have easily done so. This reptilian cryptid, as described by the witness, was around 8 to 10 feet tall, grayish to green scaly skin, shark-like teeth in its mouth, large hands with 3 claws each, and long protruding spikes all over its back, with a long tail covered in barbs or thorns. Its eyes were red, with yellow-like slits for pupils. It looked extremely angry. The thing was supposedly able to climb trees and also walked around on 2 legs, like a man would, very comfortably. The witness says that the thing had a horrible, sickening smell that emitted from it. You could smell it before it was even showing up. It smelled bad. The mom and son just kept saying how horrible the smell was, and they never want to have another encounter with whatever this was. The witness was so terrified after the incident, he and his family moved away from the area. The family actually now lives in northern Florida with their relatives in order to avoid that property and area altogether. When I spoke to the witness, he claimed there was lots of swampland that surrounded that specific county. Lots of deer, lots of hunting. He said the surrounding county is very rural. A lot of people like to hunt there. He prefers living in northern Florida. He doesn't want another reptilian encounter experience. He doesn't want to be that close to those swamps, especially after his family had their very first and only encounter. Now, the man also claims that what he saw was not a human in a suit, but something else. Something dark. Something from another world. When they were being attacked, he also admits that he got a look at the creature. The man said that his wife described it exactly the way he did. It was hideous. She was hiding inside, afraid of what might happen if she stepped outside or what to do. She said, though, too, she also smelt the foul odor before she ever saw it, and even when she saw it and after it disappeared. Her description of its claws were also identical to the man. She described them as 3 claws, which resembled retractable knives coming out of each hand. It was also reported making a loud shrieking noise as it approached. She said her husband is lucky that this thing let him get away. If anyone else has had a sighting or an encounter story that you know regarding something like this, I'd appreciate any information you could share with me, because here, there is something very strange, and if we don't have photographic evidence, at least not yet, we won't be able to prove this thing exists, which we're wanting to do. So if you ever come across some, please don't hesitate to share some with me. Thank you. My sighting happened in June of 2012. My father was undergoing chemo, and I decided to bring him out into the canoe for an afternoon trip. We headed downriver to a secluded spot that we had been on once before. On our way there, my dog started acting funny, sniffing the ground and barking. That's when this large lizard thing began coming out of the trees. I began screaming, pointing at this creature, wondering what we were seeing. My father grabbed our canoe paddles, and I began screaming for him to paddle us away. But this thing kept coming towards us. Now, it was sifting quickly through the water, toward us, like some big water snake. Not swimming though, more flowing, until it was only about 10 feet away from the canoe. Its head and body were above the waterline. Then, my dad reached in his pocket for something. I hear a gunshot go off, and a spray of blood shot out of this creature. The sight made me almost vomit. Then, it just sank down under the water. I blacked out after that for some time, in complete and utter terror. The next thing I know, we are at our destination and my father is asking if I'm okay. That's when he tells me what happened. I'm shooting this creature, and then this thing disappearing underneath the water. I had fainted, I was so terrified. My dad explained to me something large had come through us and at us through the water. He wasn't sure what it was. My dad was pale. I mean, I've never seen him like that before. Now, fast forward 15 years later, and my oldest son believes he'd seen a similar creature when he was out in the forest with his own friends. He was rounding up this group of kids when he saw something that looked like a lizard. He said it stared at him for a moment, when they all became aware of what he was seeing. The creature darted off. My son, who is now 21, has never told anybody about this until I mentioned my own sighting to him, not knowing if it was the same thing. It's weird because his friends and parents had reported their strange large 3-toed tracks around their house at nighttime. They would find these large feces piles as well, large scratches along the house of the trees. I can only suspect it's this thing. It's hanging around here. Look, I don't know if we somehow stumbled upon its territory or what, but I know it's here. My son has also seen it several more times since his initial sighting. The last time was not too long ago. He said this thing is beginning to get very, very violent. It's been destroying people's property, attacking and killing dogs. I'm still in shock by what we all saw those years ago, and never once did I ever believe in this kind of thing until that day. Now I know for sure it existed, and will continue to exist. I know I'm going to be attacked for what I'm saying, but if there's anybody else out there that has seen this thing, let me know. We need some answers.